My name is Emily Clark. I'm 28 years old, and until the moment everything fell apart, I was a senior project coordinator at a mid-sized engineering firm in Austin, Texas. I had worked there for 5 years, slowly building trust, respect, and what I thought was a solid reputation. It was a Monday morning like any other. I was still sipping from my travel mug, scrolling through emails, half listening to the background chatter of coworkers, when my name echoed across the floor. My manager, Mr. Doyle, stood in front of the bullpen, his face red and voice sharp as he said it loud enough for every soul in the room to hear. "Emily Clark, you're being terminated for financial misconduct." My brain stalled. The mug slipped from my hand, barely missing the floor as I caught it midair. Everything around me froze, but my heart began to hammer like I'd just been shoved underwater. People turned. Dozens of them. Faces I'd smiled at in morning meetings, shared birthday cupcakes with, and joked with in the break room. Their expressions blurred together shock, curiosity, judgment. It was like someone pressed play on a horror movie I hadn't signed up for. I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry and my throat felt like sandpaper. Doyle kept going, saying something about budget anomalies, unauthorized approvals, and how they had evidence. The words didn't make sense. I had no clue what he was talking about. I remember blinking hard, hoping this was a cruel prank or misunderstanding that would be cleared in the next breath. But it wasn't. Instead, he gestured toward the 2 security guards who had just stepped off the elevator. One of them handed me a box. A box. As if they'd planned this all out. My hands moved on autopilot, packing the photo of my little brother, the plant I'd grown from a wilted cutting the mug that said, "Future VP," that my team gave me after we hit our quarterly target. All while people watched in stunned silence. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral march. My legs were stiff. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. I held my head up because somehow that felt like the only thing left I could control. Doyle trailed behind me, arms crossed, like he was afraid I might grab a monitor on my way out. As I stood there waiting for the elevator to arrive, I caught the eye of Natalie Green, our head accountant. She didn't look surprised, just nervous. Her gaze darted away quickly. It was a small thing, barely a flicker, but something about it lodged in my mind. The doors opened. I stepped in with the guards. As they closed behind us, I could still feel the weight of all those eyes. My career, my name, my identity, they were all gone in less than 10 minutes. I'd always been the kind of person who played by the rules. I double-checked every form, stayed late to make sure no errors slipped through. If there was one thing I prided myself on, it was integrity. And now, just like that, they were calling me a thief. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. No one offered to speak up for me. No one asked if I was okay. I was alone in a silence that roared louder than anything Doyle had said. When we reached the parking lot, I sat in my car with the box on my lap and just stared at the steering wheel. I couldn't move, couldn't cry, couldn't breathe right. All I could think was how fast it happened, how everything I'd worked for had vanished in the blink of an accusation. And the worst part, I didn't even understand why. I had no answers, no defense, just this awful hole opening up in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but that morning was just the beginning. What came next would change everything. I started at Weston Engineering just a few weeks after graduating from UT Austin. It wasn't glamorous. My desk was squeezed into a narrow corner next to the break room fridge, and my first project was organizing archived blueprints no one had touched in years. But I loved it. Every messy folder and chaotic spreadsheet felt like a puzzle I was born to solve. Over the next 5 years, I earned every promotion by working late, showing up early, and delivering results. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when things went wrong, people came to me. I handled delays, budgets, contractors, and client meltdowns without ever letting a project collapse. By the time I became senior project coordinator, I felt like I had earned a real place there. It wasn't just the job. I truly believed in the company. Doyle wasn't warm, but he respected competence. My team trusted me. We hit deadlines, exceeded targets, and even won an industry award the year before. For a long time, it felt like we were building something that mattered. Now, sitting in my car with a cardboard box full of pieces from that life, it felt like a lie. How could they believe I was capable of stealing from them? How could they throw me out without even giving me a chance to speak? And why did Natalie Green's face keep flashing in my mind? Natalie had always been a bit intense. She'd been with the company longer than I and handled most of the internal accounting for projects. On paper, we worked side by side. In reality, we rarely crossed paths unless something needed clarifying or signing off. She was meticulous and private, always on time, always armed with facts. But something about her had always felt just a little guarded. We weren't friends. We were polite professional and occasionally tense when a project ran into budget issues. Sometimes she made little digs in meetings about project managers taking all the credit. I brushed it off. We all vented now and then. But I couldn't stop thinking about the look she gave me in that moment before the elevator doors closed. She had been standing by the copier when Doyle made his announcement. I remembered the way her eyes met mine and quickly turned away. Not shocked, not confused, just guilty. The memory started to play on loop. Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't anyone, but especially her? She had access to every dollar that came in or out of our projects. If money had gone missing, she would have known about it first. I remembered a project from 2 months ago where she asked me to approve a last-minute transfer. She said we needed to shift 10 grand to cover unexpected permit delays. Her explanation had sounded reasonable at the time. I barely questioned it. But now I wondered if she had used my sign-off as cover for something else. It hit me that I never truly understood how much power she had behind the scenes. She managed the flow of money like a dam controls a river. And if she wanted to reroute it, all she needed was a plausible excuse and someone like me to sign off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking back to those interactions, replaying them with new eyes. The way she avoided direct conversations. The strange timing of some of her emails. The precision she used to avoid being questioned. I started to feel something I hadn't let myself feel since I left that building. Doubt. Not about myself, about her. I had spent the day ashamed, questioning my worth, wondering how I had ended up here. But now, I was starting to think that I wasn't the one who made the mistake. Maybe someone else had planned this all along. Maybe that look on her face wasn't guilt for what was happening to me. Maybe it was fear that I might figure it out. And in that moment, a seed was planted. A quiet but growing certainty that I hadn't been wrong. I had been targeted, and Natalie Green was the reason. The night after I got fired, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop staring at folders I'd copied for reference long before any of this happened. Every click felt like peeling back a layer of something rotten I hadn't noticed until now. I told myself I was just looking for answers, but the truth was, I was obsessed. I scrolled through hundreds of emails, budget summaries, and old approvals I'd barely glanced at before. The deeper I went, the more something started to feel off. Some of the budget transfer requests were time-stamped at bizarre hours. One had been sent at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday. Another came in just before midnight on a federal holiday. They were all from Natalie. Her tone was always calm, always professional. But no one in our office worked like that. At first, I assumed she was just dedicated. Maybe she was working late. Maybe she wanted to impress Doyle. But the pattern kept repeating. Transfers, requests, budget reallocations. Always late, always urgent. Always just enough detail to seem reasonable. I opened a spreadsheet and started logging everything. Project name, amount moved, date and time, who initiated it, who approved it. My name showed up too many times. I had greenlit dozens of these without ever thinking twice. It wasn't just the timing. It was how the amounts hovered right below the threshold that required Doyle's approval. 15,000 here, 11,000 there, never more than 20. Just small enough to stay off the radar. My stomach turned as I realized how often I'd been used. I'd trusted her expertise. She had the authority to request these transfers. I'd never questioned it because she always came with answers, documents, and numbers that made sense. Until now. I started marking the ones that seemed most suspicious. The emails came in waves, usually on weekends or after 10 p.m., as if she were waiting for the office to be quiet. I pictured her sitting alone at her desk, sliding money between projects like pieces on a chessboard, and all of it, every move, left a trail with my initials stamped on it. By 3 a.m., I had a spreadsheet full of red flags and a growing knot in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup, and I had just started unraveling it. The more I dug into those records, the more everything started to line up, but not in a way that helped me. It became painfully clear that every single transfer I had approved had been orchestrated with precision, and the person pulling the strings had been Natalie all along. Each transaction carried my approval, but she had framed it with her language, her numbers, her timing. The supporting documents she attached vendor quotes. Client change orders, expense summaries seemed legitimate on the surface. But once I started comparing files, some of the details didn't match up. A quote supposedly from a subcontractor didn't have the usual footer formatting. A signature block looked slightly off. One invoice number repeated across 2 different projects that should have had separate vendors. I started seeing signs I had overlooked, not because I was careless, but because someone had carefully made it look normal. My frustration turned to anger, not just at Natalie, but at myself for being so blind. I thought I was cautious. I thought I was smart. But she'd used that. She'd played to my trust, my work ethic, and my willingness to get things done without slowing the process down. I had become the perfect cover for her scheme. I pulled up one specific case that really shook me. It was a request from Natalie asking to transfer $14,000 from one municipal project to another, citing emergency drainage concerns. It looked urgent, time-sensitive. I remembered signing off on it quickly so we wouldn't hold up a city inspection. But the email was sent at 11:52 p.m. on a Saturday, and there had never been any mention of drainage issues in our follow-up meetings. Not once. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I reread the email. Every word felt colder now, more calculated. This wasn't someone working overtime. This was someone moving in the dark building, a trail that always led back to me. I opened our internal policy guide and reread the section on approval thresholds. Major reallocations above $10,000 were supposed to go through Doyle, but these hadn't. Why hadn't he noticed? Why hadn't anyone? The only explanation that made sense was that Natalie knew the system better than all of us. She knew which rules we ignored when we were tired. She knew who to loop in, who to keep out. And most of all, she knew that if it ever came to light, the person who signed the approvals would take the fall. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't tired anymore. I was focused. I had been tricked, yes. But now, I had proof, and proof meant power. Natalie had built a trap and used me as bait, but I had every intention of turning her plan inside out. I wasn't going to sit quietly while she walked away clean. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about taking back my name. 2 days after I started connecting the final dots, my phone rang. The screen showed Mr. Doyle's number and my stomach tightened. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, he called again. This time I picked up. His voice was flat but tight with strain. He asked if I could come to the office immediately. There had been a development. I walked into the building through the same doors I had exited in humiliation just days before. Doyle met me in the lobby, his tie loose and his face pale. He didn't look me in the eye. As we rode the elevator up, I noticed how quiet the office had become. Conversations stopped when I passed. No one met my gaze. It was as if they knew something was wrong and didn't want to be part of it. He led me into his office, closed the door, and motioned for me to sit. I didn't. He cleared his throat, then told me they had reopened the investigation and found significant inconsistencies in the financial records. Someone else had manipulated the documentation. It wasn't me. He admitted that their initial review had been rushed and I had been terminated based on incomplete evidence. I waited for the apology, and when it came, it felt rehearsed. He said they wanted to offer me my job back, along with a promotion and a salary bump to reflect the error. He called it a gesture of goodwill. I saw it for what it really was, a desperate attempt to patch over a disaster before it spread further. I told him I wasn't coming back. His eyebrows lifted slightly like he hadn't expected that. I reminded him how he had called me a thief in front of the entire floor. He stood behind security as they marched me out. How he didn't ask a single question before making up his mind. His mouth opened, but I cut him off. I said I'd be in touch, through my attorney. That afternoon, I met with Lauren Chen, a lawyer referred to me by a friend. She listened without interrupting, taking notes as I laid out the timeline, the documents, and the emails. When I was finished, she looked at me and said I had a strong case for wrongful termination, reputational harm, and emotional distress. We spent the next few hours reviewing company policy, internal processes, and the pattern of negligence that led to my firing. She asked me how I wanted to proceed. I didn't hesitate. I told her I didn't want my job back. I wanted accountability. I wanted a public acknowledgement of their failure. I wanted my name cleared without condition. Lauren said she'd start by sending a formal demand letter and requesting access to their investigation records. She explained that the timing of their mistake, their delay in contacting me, and the public nature of my termination would strengthen the case. As we wrapped up, she asked if I was sure I didn't want to settle quickly. I told her no. I had spent enough time staying quiet to keep the peace. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally felt in control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. I had turned the corner from victim to advocate, and I wasn't going back. What they did to me couldn't be undone with money or a new title. I didn't want their office, their apology, or their shallow fixes. I wanted something deeper, a truth on the record, a message to every manager who thought they could ruin someone's life and move on like nothing happened. I wasn't interested in returning. I was interested in making sure this never happened to anyone else. Within a week of Lauren sending the demand letter, everything started to unravel on their side. The company's legal team responded quickly, too quickly, like they already knew what we were about to uncover. Turns out, they had quietly reopened the investigation right after I left, and what they found wasn't just a mistake. It was a full-blown fraud operation. Natalie had been stealing money in small increments for almost a year. Nearly $92,000 in total. She used late-night access to the system, logging in remotely on weekends and holidays, making changes when no one was around to see her. She created fake vendor documents, duplicated purchase orders, and even forged digital signatures. All of it tied together by just enough plausible detail to avoid suspicion. But she slipped. IT logs showed her activity outside normal hours, and timestamps on project files contradicted internal deadlines. Once the auditors traced everything, there was no room for doubt. She had been rerouting funds through projects I was attached to, using my approvals to legitimize the theft. It was calculated, precise, and deeply personal. The district attorney pressed charges for embezzlement and document falsification. Natalie was arrested and eventually sentenced to 20 months in state prison. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial and agreed to pay restitution. Her career was over, her reputation was ruined, and not because I exposed her, but because the truth caught up with her in the end. As for the company, they knew they had crossed a line. The public nature of my termination combined with the evidence we had made their legal position almost indefensible. They issued a formal statement clearing my name and admitting their failure to investigate thoroughly. They also agreed to a private settlement of $240,000. I didn't want to go back. I didn't need to. What I wanted was already mine. My name, my truth, my peace. Seeing Natalie held accountable, hearing the company admit their mistake out loud, and knowing the story wouldn't be buried, that was enough. I didn't smile when I got the news, but I did feel something close to justice. Not revenge. Just the satisfaction of knowing I had been right all along. And they all finally knew it too. 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized, I got an email from a company I had admired for years. Meridian West was one of the most respected engineering firms in the state, known for its ethics as much as its results. The subject line was simple. Interested in a conversation, we set up a call, and the tone from the start was different. No hesitation, no questions about my past. Just curiosity about how I managed high-pressure projects and what kind of team I liked leading. They already knew what had happened. The story had traveled. But they didn't treat me like damaged goods. They saw resilience, not scandal. 2 weeks later, I walked into a sleek office space in downtown Austin and signed a contract that made me their new senior project lead. The salary was 30% higher than what I'd made before, and the benefits were better. But it wasn't about the money. It was the first time since everything collapsed that I felt wanted not out of pity, but because I brought something valuable to the table. On my first day, I took a quiet moment in the elevator alone, holding a new company badge in my hand. I thought about that morning I had been escorted out, holding a cardboard box filled with pieces of a career I thought I'd lost forever. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I didn't want to be. Getting justice had mattered. Seeing Natalie held accountable, making the company admit their mistake, brought closure. But what healed me was this: a clean desk, a fresh notepad, a team that respected my experience before I had even earned it here. It felt like the beginning of something real. I didn't tell many people at my old job where I had landed. A few reached out, some with apologies, some with awkward silence. I didn't need their explanations anymore. I had already learned that the only validation I truly needed came from myself. People think revenge is about destruction, but it's not. It's about refusing to stay in the place where someone else left you broken. It's about choosing to rebuild, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that they never had the right to define you in the first place. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I know I'm stronger because of it. I know how to spot manipulation. I know how to listen to my instincts, and I know that walking away from something broken can sometimes be the first step toward building something better. I keep a framed copy of my offer letter from Meridian West on my desk. Not to remind me of the past, but to anchor me in the present. Every time I glance at it, I remember how far I've come. I didn't just get my career back. I got my peace back, and that more than anything was worth fighting for. If you've ever been pushed to the edge, if someone's tried to take everything from you, let me tell you, what you do next is everything. And sometimes, the best way to rise isn't by looking back. It's by stepping into something new that finally feels right.